Hello there, and welcome to episode 7 of Kolonization Project. Right now we are returning to the Spacelab space station, which we launched in the last episode, and we are just returning the crew home back to the surface of Kerbin because they are running out of food and water, and we don't want them to completely run out of food and water. We want to deorbit the life support module, but we don't want to deorbit the little material kits module, which is what I have attached right now to the crew transfer vehicle. Because the material kits are helpful because they let you build things in space, and we might want to do that in the future. And we're leaving them in space because that's just less material kits that we're going to have to send up in the future. But the life support module, it's not going to do that, so we can just deorbit that with the crew transfer vehicle and just have it burn up in the atmosphere because it doesn't really have a use anymore. I am deorbiting the entire spacecraft with the RCS thrusters because we actually don't have any main engines. Some spacecraft actually do this because some spacecraft don't have main engines, like the Dragon spacecraft. Dragon has the Super Dracos, which are the launch abort system, but those aren't really used for deorbiting. They're used for escaping if the booster explodes, and they were also supposed to be used for propulsive landing, but that never happened. But we have landed, and we can move on to the first launch of this episode, which is going to be carrying a probe to Eve. So we have an Eve transfer window coming up, and we want to take advantage of it. So we are launching 3 different probes to Eve: an Eve lander, an Eve orbiter, and a Gilly lander. We are launching the Gilly lander right now, and we are launching this on a Constellation rocket. I did rename it to Constellation. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep that name because Constellation might be one of the names of a bigger rocket, like a giant 5-meter diameter rocket. Sort of like the Space Launch System, but of course it's going to be reusable because we don't want to be throwing expensive engines away. And, SLS was sort of the continuation of the Constellation program, but I don't know, but that's what we're calling it for now, the Constellation launcher. And I changed the name because the old one didn't make really much sense. The Horsehead Nebula is not bigger than the Pallades Nebula. In fact, it's actually quite smaller, which is the reason why I named it that in the first place. I was trying to name the launch vehicles after nebulae, but that logic doesn't really work out. And I just think Constellation sounds like a better name. But we have performed our escape burn, and this will actually be the first object that's supposed to go into a solar orbit that will go into a solar orbit. The reason why I'm saying it like that is because the MUN, I think it was MUN 2 probe, when we did a flyby mission of the MUN, it got a gravity assist off it, and I think it got another one, and all of those gravity assists just yeeted it out of the Kerbin system. And yeah, it became our first probe to go into a solar orbit, which was unintentional. I believe this probably happened at least once before in real life. I believe a lot of rocket stages went into a heliocentric orbit, which weren't, because, you know, well, like, if you're sending a probe to a flyby mission out to the moon, like, you don't really need to care about the second stage too much, because it's either going to return back to Earth, or it's going to go out of Earth's sphere of influence. So you don't really need to worry about second stages when it comes to that. Although I could very well be wrong. I don't really know that much about rocket stage safety. But we have just launched the Eve orbiter, which will, as you may be able to guess, orbit Eve. And we can now move on to the Eve lander. I had to put an extra 2 solid rocket boosters on this. Not the traditional SRBs that we used for the Constellation rockets. We normally use a bunch of the shrimp SRBs because they're kind of small. We can attach a bunch quite easily, but we needed the extra power that the 2 Thumper SRBs provided, so we just went with that, and it worked well because I tested this before, and the second stage didn't have enough thrust to weight ratio to actually get into orbit, so yeah, we really needed the SRBs. And the whole reason why this payload is really heavy is because we're landing on Eve, so we need a giant heat shield to be able to land on... Yeah, we need a giant heat shield to be able to land on Eve, and you know that's a bit of extra weight. And we also have this small little kick stage at the top, which is just there for the extra delta V. Another thing you may note is that this is a slightly upgraded version of the Constellation. If you remember before, we used a single Cheetah engine, which was based off... I forget which one it was, but it was the LR something that was used on the Titan booster. Yeah, we switched that out for 5 of the... I forget what they're called, but they're really efficient methane engines. And, you know, it was a more efficient option, so I went with it. And, yes, that's about the only reason why I chose that. But now what we are doing is launching a Sarnas booster, and it is carrying a new crew to the Spacelab space station. So we have a bunch of contracts to rescue stranded Kerbals in orbit that other agencies have left there, because I mean I don't know why. I mean we're just rescuing the Kerbals. We don't we don't strand them up there. We just rescue them. That's their only job here. So, yeah, we have a bunch of contracts to do just that. And I thought, why not just have a craft that goes in orbit and just is like a space tug that is able to rescue Kerbals by just being a space tug, I guess. And that's what this is. It is a small little vehicle. It can only carry 2 Kerbals. But we only need one. We only need one just to crew the space station to make sure like the new crew member doesn't plan on sabotaging the entire space station and like deorbiting it or something. We wouldn't want that happening, so we just bring a new crew member along. Sergei Kerman is a new member to the space program, and you may notice that he is not a pilot, engineer, or scientist. Rather, he is a scout, which means that he can stay in orbit for very long periods of time as long as he has enough food and water. And we didn't need a pilot because that command capsule right there has a probe core built into it. We don't need an engineer because we're not building anything, and we don't need a scientist because we're not producing any science from this. But we need a Kerbal who can stay in orbit for long periods of time without getting homesick, and that's exactly what a scout does. And we are also using a very efficient engine. I wanted the most efficient engine that we could get, because we don't want to have to be sending refueling missions up here every couple rescue missions we complete with this. So I chose the most efficient engine we have, which was a RL-10 engine, I believe. And the RL-10 in real life is actually an extremely efficient engine, which is why a lot of rockets use it. The Delta IV Heavy and Delta Medium use it. The Atlas V uses it. I think the Atlas V uses it. Yeah, because it has the Centaur upper stage that uses an RL-10. The SLS will use it if and it will SLS will eventually, I think it will use 4 RL-10 engines, but the Block 1 only uses 1 RL-10, although it is debatable whether it will actually get to that point, because SLS and Starship are coming online at about the same time, and Starship is fully reusable. SLS costs like $1 billion per launch, which is really expensive. And Starship hopefully will be much cheaper than SLS because it's reusable. And yeah, that's about it. But SLS, I believe SLS will fly eventually. It's not about that. I don't think it's about whether or not SLS will ever actually fly. It's about whether or not it will actually go past like the first 3 Artemis missions, which I do really want to see SLS fly. I really do want to see the Artemis program, and I really want to see the Artemis program succeed, because we're going to be going back to the moon, and that's cool. But yeah, enough about SLS. We have rescued our crew member, and she can now wait on the space station for a crew vehicle to pick her up. That is not what we're doing right now, though, because we have a bit of life support on that space station, and I wanted to do this because I don't know why. I don't think the crew transfer vehicle was ready at the time, so this is just something to pass the time in between those 2 launches. So this is a relay satellite that will be going into a very precise orbit because we have a contract to do that, and it will stay there until it eventually gets yeeted out of the Kerbin system, much like the Mun 2 probe, because it's actually going into an orbit that intersects the Mun, which means that it's not entirely a completely stable orbit. Thankfully, the contract doesn't, it really doesn't care that it's not in a completely stable orbit. It just cares that we get it into the right orbit. So yeah, it's not going to be completely operational within like a year or so. But I mean, hey, that's not our problem. That's the customer's problem. They want it in this precise orbit. I mean, I guess they should have like studied that the moon would intersect it at some point. But oh well. The customer, they're paying quite well, so I mean, we're not complaining. We actually really don't need all of the funds that we're getting right now, but if we're launching a bunch of relay satellites, I mean, we might as well get some money from it. And you know, if we want to do something ambitious in the future, like launch more space stations, if we want to do a space station around the Mun, we would want more funds from that, because building space stations are kind of expensive, and you know, they're kind of expensive. And if we ever want to be sending Kerbals interplanetary, that's going to be a really expensive mission, but it would pay really well, because our contracts to send Kerbals to Duna would be like a million funds just for the contracts, and that's not even counting all of the world firsts that we would receive by landing Kerbals on Duna. So, but we still would need that initial investment, which would cost a lot. But that won't be for a long time. But now we are launching a new plane. This is the Endurance, and you may be wondering why we need another plane, because we already have that research plane that can air launch small rockets, small sounding rockets. They aren't great. I don't think it could launch an orbital rocket. But this is actually a single stage to orbit, because I was like, you know what, why not build a single stage to orbit? I think that would be kind of cool, because SSTOs are really cool, because they're planes, they fly into space. And I mean, the space shuttle is cool. It's a plane that flies into space, and this one's fully reusable because it's only one stage, and it would be kind of a waste of a rocket if we weren't. It would be a waste of this plane just to toss it out every launch. But yeah, it's kind of hard to make SSTOs this early in the game. We don't have very good jet engines. We only have these Panther engines, which are very good for fighter aircraft, if you ever want to make fighter aircraft in Kerbal Space Program, because they have really good gimbal range. And yeah, they're really good for maneuverable jets, but they don't have a very high top speed, and they don't have a very high top speed, and they can be kind of inefficient at times. So most of our ascent is powered by that hydrogen engine that you see in the center. We could have gone for a more efficient engine, but then we wouldn't have enough thrust to get into orbit, and you know, that would be kind of bad. So we just went with this hydrogen engine, which is very efficient and it has very high thrust. This is also the same engine that we used on the Pallades launch vehicle, which is hard to find. It's hard to find a use for the Pallades anymore, because if we're launching a satellite, we might as well do it on the Constellation. And if we're launching crew, then we might as well launch it on a Sarnis. So, or an endurance, because we have this SSTO now. So yeah, it's just kind of hard to find a use for it anymore, but we are sort of reusing the engines from it. And it's worked quite well, though our fuel margins are quite low, as you will be able to see. But the whole purpose of this mission was to return our rescued Kerbal back home. You may also be wondering why I need an SSTO this early in the space program, and that is because of the simple fact that sending a Sarnis booster all the way up to orbit and just to get the crew back home, it's kind of expensive even with the reusability of the Sarnis, and it takes a lot of time to do so. So this is sort of just a quick and easy method of getting crew to and from Spacelab. That's all this thing is able to do. It can't carry any payload. As you can see with that small mission that we just did, we don't have any more oxidizer. We have plenty of liquid fuel because we didn't use very much of it on our ascent, but we have 0.4 units of oxidizer left, which means that, yeah, if you look in the bottom right corner, we have 1 meter per second left in that rocket stage. So we cut the fuel margins on this quite close. But we do eventually make it back to the runway. And yeah, this thing can't carry any payload into orbit besides the crew that it does carry. So it also doesn't have any cargo bays, so we can't really use that. So yeah, the only purpose for endurance is to resupply Spacelab, which I think is a good purpose. I really do like SSTOs. They can just be turned around so easily. In fact, we actually turn around the next launch of endurance within like 4 days. So yeah, the episode ended. I didn't realize that was the end of the episode, but thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.